Hey everyone, this is Raiko. I just wanted to make a video showing the full process of making a photogrammetry, 3D model that we use here in Tabletop Simulator, similar to all these ones you see here. There's a lot of different ways we can make these with a few different programs, but this is just the way that myself and a couple others have sort of figured out the best way for us. So we use Agisoft Metashape, and the images we are using come from GW's website. So in this case, we're going to be using the images for this Infernus abomination from Horus Heresy. And you have to first make sure that they have a 360 available. Then we use a script made by Khaaarl, which let's pull up here. And once that is installed and running and you have this window popping up, you want to grab the URL. I like to just grab the base URL without any search queries or anything. And where'd it go here? There it is. Go ahead and punch it in here. And I do headless browser off so that the window loads. I've noticed that without the window popping up, sometimes it just fails entirely. So with this all set up, we'll just hit download. You can see it's going to open Firefox here. And now the script is going to automatically go through, search the website for the 360 images, and rip them. Now, there's actually two versions of all these images. There's a lower resolution version and a higher resolution version. The higher resolution version is actually not very easy to get. You need to use a script to pull it, which is what this is doing. So it found the 360s. Now it's going to ask us to create a file. It'll automatically choose the name. For this, I'm just going to call it Horus Heresy. We're going to just let it pick, go in there. So now it's going to open it back up and start going through those 360 images. All right, so it's done. It's made it to 412. That's the final image in the series. That's the way most GW images are structured. There's 4 rows of 12. Older ones is a single row of 48, I believe. And those are more difficult to scan because you can't see the top of the model often. And sometimes the actual photo quality is worse too. But anyway, this is done. So we can actually go ahead and close all this down. So now we have Metashape open. Let's find that, let's find what we just downloaded. Here are the images. So we're just going to select all these and drag them into chunk 1. Chunks are basically just different projects. It's similar to like if you're in Photoshop and you have different tabs of images open. That's all that chunks are. And there are ways of getting chunks to like communicate with each other. You can merge models and stuff, but we're not going to do any of that. So first of all, we also will later be using a program called Topaz or any other AI upscaler. It works fine, I'm sure. This is just the best one we've found. And what I like to do is upscale the final texture that it produces, but you can also upscale these source images instead. The downside of that is the AI generative software is adding texture and details to these models. And the way the photogrammetry software works is it looks for those textures and details and it tracks them from image to image. So the problem with it, though, is every single upscaled image might not be identical going through the upscaling software. Those textures might vary between images, and then therefore confusing the program when it's trying to keep track from image to image. So when possible, I like to use the source images and then upscale later. So first we want to go up to Workflow and then Align Photos. Alternatively, you can right-click the chunk, go into Process, and all the same options are right here. Now, under Align Photos, you'll find that sometimes when you align, it's going to be messed up, either really, really messed up or just a few missing. If it's really messed up, I would go back in and try aligning again. You'll have to hit Reset Current Alignment as a checkbox, and then try some of these options. Estimated, sequential, maybe go from highest to high. Sometimes that has some effect on it too. But typically, you could just leave all of these on default settings. key points are really important. The key points is basically the program identifying a point throughout all the textures that it's able to track consistently and find in 3D space. Setting a key point limit is not a good idea usually, because that's giving a limit to the number of tracking points it's able to have as it's looking around the model. It's useful if you're using images that are just in the hundreds and it's a really detailed model, because then it'll find hundreds of thousands of key points, and that will just make it take longer than it really needs to. Then you can limit it to like 50,000 or something, and that'll just speed up the process and you won't lose quality. But for this, we need every key point we can get because we only have these 48 images. So let's just keep everything on default and hit OK. All right, it is done. And you'll see we have 21,785 tie points. Basically, the higher that number, the more accurately it was able to figure things out. You can see our model down here represented in those tie points. We'll get to that in a second. But first, we got to address something. If you'll notice here, as you pan around, there's one missing. And if we look at all of these images from an angle, which we can actually hold control and use our scroll wheel to change our orthographic perspective to make everything flat, looks like everything is pretty well aligned, except for that's going up here on the top. This top one is just floating and it's missing from there. So what we're going to do is on the third row up here on the top, we can find the images. So from 1 to 12, I'm going to select all these, and I'm just going to hit reset camera alignment and tap enter, and then click align selected cameras. And there we go. We're just sort of telling it to, okay, now that we have everything else as reference, let's just retry these, and it usually gets them right. Whenever you see a few that are misaligned like that, we call it reflowing, and we just go through and reflow a bunch of these, and usually it gets pretty accurate after that. If you did the alignment to begin with, and it's just all over the place, there's no pattern to any of it, then you could be running into a lot of other issues. The model itself might not have enough key points or tie points for it to track, because it's like smooth or featureless or reflective. It can confuse the program a lot. So one of the things that you'll need to do is take it into like Photoshop or a photo editing program and mask the background black. Sometimes having the background black instead of white helps a lot. Sometimes putting it into that upscaler will actually help, because while the textures might vary between pictures a little bit, having more texture at all might help. So in this case, this is a pretty easy model, and it worked out all right. Oh, and in my experience, the bigger giant models with huge wings or something are often the ones that the program has a lot harder time tracking. That and vehicles, because they're very symmetrical, and sometimes it can't tell the difference between the left side and the right side. But for now, we got this all done, so let's go to the next step. Workflow, build model. Now here, first I want to make sure, there's a setting we'll mess with later, but I want to make sure I have it on. Yes. You want to make sure your Metashape is using your graphics card. This next part is going to take a lot longer if it's not using your graphics card, or if you have a low-end graphics card. What it's going to do is calculate depth maps. So some programs will use point clouds, or you can use your tie points, but we're going to use depth maps. That's what we found works best for us, to generate the 3D model. We want to set our face count limit. This is very, very important. Tabletop Simulator doesn't like having high poly models directly imported. In our experience, roughly 25,000 is the limit. 30,000 sometimes will get denied. It just will fail to be added into the game. So 15,000 is usually a pretty good amount for any sort of infantry model. If it's a small token thing, you can go a lot less. Or if it's a big character, you can try to hit that 25K max, or even double it, go to 50K, and then split the model in two in Blender later. But for now, we're just going to go with 15. That's what I usually stick with. For everything else, we're going to leave it on default, as you see here. I think mild was default, but we found that mild depth filtering is best, so we're good there. And let's hit OK. our model is done, but there's still quite a few more steps we got to do. So first of all, I just wanted to mention, though, that 23,000 tie points for this project is actually pretty good. It's a good number. Sometimes you'll see them as low as 10,000 or less. And when it starts to get that low, we're going to run into issues. Parts of the model will go missing. There'll be holes in the capes and stuff like that. So you got to make sure you try to get these images as detailed as possible. But we're going to double click on the model that's there, and now you can zoom in. And again, holding Control and scroll wheel will change your 3D perspective. So now it's better in 3D or 2D. It's up to you. I like to work in the 2D environment. So you'll see here that there's a lot of white on the bottom of this base. We're going to address that here in a second, as well as on the bottom. Oh, and this texture looks really low quality right now because this is just a placeholder. We haven't generated the actual texture yet, and it's basically just giving us an estimation of the color space. Another little pro tip here is the more clear and defined the texture is on this model at this step is a very good sign that you're going to have a good looking texture later. If it's very blobby and you can't really make it out, you might run into troubles later. But for now, let's go to the next steps. So we need to get rid of all this white. That comes in with masking, which is a huge part of this whole process. Some more complicated models that have lots of fiery swirls and stuff like that, you're going to need to go a lot more crazy with masking. And you might even want to open it up in Photoshop or Affinity Photo or some other equivalent and actually do masking there. But we could actually do it in the program if it's just a little bit of masking here and there. But first, let's cut off the bottom of this base because we're not going to need all that. And it's actually using up texture space. So our model will have a lower resolution texture because this is using up so much of it. What I like to do is flatten this out. Now I'm left clicking on the ball to move it around and then middle click to drag this down. And I'm trying to make it level with my screen. So I'm looking right across the top and level with the bottom here, just using that as reference. So that way I know it's flat. Now up here, you can change your region. The region is this box you kind of see at an angle here. This is telling the program, I only want to work with the stuff that's in this box. Ignore everything else. So we want to align that region to our view since we've aligned it to the model nicely. Now click the section here. Then we can just drag this up so that we are only using part of the base. You don't want to go too high because it's actually going to get kind of jagged and cut off and it might go too high. So just cut off the bottom of the base. That's all you need. Now make sure the bounding box isn't going into the model at all. You can do that by resize region here and just kind of control it like this. And you can click and drag and move around to kind of get a better angle. But man, the Metashape UI is not great, so it's hard to control. But yeah, it looks good. I'm not cutting off any models I don't want. So let's go back to our normal arrow, mouse pointer. So from here, the next time we build the model, it's going to ignore everything outside the box and cut off that. We want that. But we also want it to ignore all this. So we do that with masking. The best way is you find the angle that has the most white visible, which might be like right here, and you zoom out until you kind of you see the camera here. This camera, this photo that's associated with this one, is what's contributing most of that white. So let's go in here and find 112, this one, double click it, and now we can find that camera angle. Up here, in this option, you want to click Intelligent Scissors or Magic Wand. These both we use them a lot. W and L is the shortcut keys for those. Let's start with Intelligent Scissors. So what we're going to do is you click somewhere, anywhere, usually close to the edge of the model, and you'll see it's going to have a point. And you can keep clicking and just keep adding points. But I'm going to hit escape real quick to exit that. Because what you can do is if the model is dark and high contrast enough against the white background, you can just hold Control, and you'll see that it's automatically sticking to the edge of the model. It's very nice. You might have to occasionally click because it's going to want to kind of go wild sometimes to kind of like anchor it back down to a new point. And you just kind of keep doing that. Now see how it's wanting to skip this gold part here? It's because it has a lot of white in it and the background is white. And so it's kind of getting confused where the edge of that is. And that kind of relates to where I mentioned earlier we might want to change the entire background to black in a photo editing program because then it can actually distinguish the edges a little bit easier that way. But for now, we're just going to go in here. I'm going to let go of Control so I can manually add these in. And that's probably low enough. So what we're doing, I'm going to hit escape real quick, and that's going to connect the final points. And then Control-Shift-A to add the mask. You can also right-click and add mask. But what we're doing here is we're telling it to ignore everything that's within this zone. And if you go back to the model, you'll notice That's where all that white is. So we're going to try to tell it to just ignore it and cut out the white. So what I'm going to do, because this model is very high contrast and there's not a lot of white on white, you can actually go back in and use the magic wand tool. And that's just going to bulk select this whole area, Control-Shift-A. Now this can be a little bit dangerous. Here, I'm going to go ahead and hit the whole model and you'll see what I mean. I'm just going to do all of the spaces. So you'll see here, these spikes have a lot of white on them. Because that tool is automatic covering the whole thing, it ate into a lot of that white. You can control that with the magic wand settings, the tolerance. I have mine pretty low. Any lower and it starts to just not work at all. Any higher and then it will eat into it even more. So where I have it right now is kind of a sweet spot. You can kind of copy this. But what we're going to need to do is fix that now. So we're going to go into our intelligent scissors and we're going to select the outline of this spike. And connect that. Now Control-Shift-S or right-click and subtract to remove the selection of mask we did. So now we have our spikes back. You're going to look for the edge of the model, find some more spots that it's cut off that we don't want it to. Whenever you use the magic wand tool, you really need to make sure you go around the whole edge of the model and double check it's not cutting anything off. Hit Escape, Control-Shift-S. There we go. I think that's pretty good though. This one is pretty good. It's a lot of dark on white, so it works really well actually. So we're done with this angle, but if you notice, there's other angles that have a lot of white in them. Under the gun here, under his arm here. And you'll notice that it's always under, right? And that's because these camera angles go up. So as the camera is going up, it's clarifying. It's going, okay, yeah, I can see the top now, we're good. But there are no angles going down, so we start to get all that white. So realistically, the only time we ever need to mask is usually on just layer 1 through 12. Sometimes, because, like for example, the way he has his spiked gauntlet thing there, his claws, they're at an angle, so sometimes going from an upper angle and masking from here might be better, but because like from this angle, you're not going to be able to see that. So we're going to go back in and we're going to do some more masking. And I'm just going to probably fast forward through this part because this is the most time consuming part of the entire process of getting models into TTS. And you pretty much always have to do this. So now that I've gone through and masked most of these, I just wanted to show one of these here. Which one was that? Here. You don't necessarily have to go through and fully mask every single inch of every single image on the first layer. You can actually just go in and use the intelligent scissors here to just mask out the lower parts here and kind of call it good like that. So I'm going to go in and get all of this. Basically like that. I'm just going to use the magic wand for this one. And let's get in here. And maybe under here as well. There we go. And let's go down here. Anywhere that's just on the bottom. That's probably good enough. Maybe underneath here. And you can be as picky as you want about this. I like to make sure my stuff is nearly perfect, so I take my time. Oops. There we go. Okay, once all that's done, let's go ahead and rebuild this model again. So workflow, build model. Now this is a very, very important step. Make sure you go into advanced and click use strict volumetric masks. this will use the masks that you just made. If you don't have that checked, then nothing will change. So make sure you have that checked, and you have to hit the checkbox every time you come back in here. It doesn't remember it. So make sure you hit that. And we often do have to come back here and redo it a couple times, as we maybe missed a spot when we were doing the mask, which we probably will. So we'll see here in a second. Oh, and this step takes a lot less time because it already built the depth map that we are using to make the 3D model. So it's just referencing the same one. All right. See, way better. There's a lot. I mean, there's basically no more white on here, and that's exactly what we want. So next, we want to build our texture. But before we build the texture, in this particular version of Metashape, we have found out that there is a bug. If you have GPU processing turned on, and it tries to build the texture using that, it comes out blotchy and kind of messy. And so if you turn it off, then basically everything you do here is going to take a little bit longer. So we only turn it off for building the texture. Set your texture resolution. For small infantry, we usually go with 2048, but you can also do 4K, 4096. But we want to make sure we're compressing that down later, because the file size for these can get quite big, and that's just unnecessary in TTS. And I'll show you how to compress it later. What I like to do is start with 2048 and then use the Topaz AI upscaling to bring it up to 4K. And it adds texture and detail to it that's just simply not there from the GW pictures, and it looks a lot better. So 2048, keep everything on default aside from that. We don't need to mess with any of these settings. There it is. So we can see the white a bit more clearly. I don't know if we're going to be able to get rid of that because we've masked that in its angle, which is about here. You see it's masked, and there's still some white there, so there's not going to be anything we can do about that. But we can actually fix that a little bit in Blender later. But for now, this is looking great. So I think we're just about done with this. So let's go ahead and export model. So that's under File, Export Model. Now, I usually put it in the same place I have the rest of the files saved. So Horus Heresy, Furnace Abomination. Let's just copy the name of that. Now we're in here. And I'm just going to paste that name. So this will be the file name for the model. And then it's going to create the texture. We just want to use JPEG. It compresses very small, and we don't need super high quality for TTS. And the rest of this we just don't need to mess with. And that's it. So next, we're going to go into Blender. We're going to import that model. So let's open it up. Here it is. And I just drag and drop it in. Import. And let's change to a 2D perspective by clicking one of the axes here. And you can see it there, but it's not centered. So what you want to do is right click, set origin, geometry to origin, which is in the center of the whole everything here. So now it got moved. First of all, before I go any further, you'll see that I have all of the base sizes in here. This is another very important step. We need to scale our model correctly before we bring it into TTS, because scaling it in TTS can have some annoying side effects down the road. So for now, let's just get it perfect in here. I can include a Blender file that you can use that has all of these bases in it. And you can actually set that as your default startup file right here. So that every time you load up Blender, it just loads with the bases. That's what I do. It's super handy. So first of all, you'll see how like blocky this looks. Let's just right click that and shade smooth. And this actually shows up in TTS too. So it'll look all polygon and blocky in the game unless you do this. And it looks way better this way. Also, up here in your viewport shading, you're going to want to change that so you can actually see the texture. It automatically loads the texture in because it's in the same folder, and it has this material file here, which is telling the program that this object goes with this texture because they have all the same file name. So it's all automatic because of that. So now that it's centered, we can kind of rotate it around here, see that it's centered. We want to start getting it into position. So make sure you're on the move tool and then tap R to rotate. And you can hold shift to make it fine-tuned. But we're just going to kind of eyeball it for now. Oops. There we go. So get that looking good. Yeah, it's already pretty flat. Now let's move it up. Okay, first we actually need to double check what base size this guy's using. So let's bring up his page. They usually have it listed on their website, but if it's not, you can open it up in Wahapedia and find it in there. But here, 32 millimeter round base. So let's show that. Now, it's set underneath the origin point. And that's important because when we load this into TTS, the origin point will be the center of the model where like the collider will be. So we want to make sure that will be the origin. Right now, the origin is like up here in the middle, like where his legs are, and that's bad. But for now, we just want to kind of get that flat, close enough, eyeball it so that this is kind of in the center. Then right click, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. So now it was in the legs, now it's down here where we want it to be. But it's still not going to be perfect yet. We'll fine tune that in a minute. So now tap S to scale up. And we're going to keep scaling it. So now we need to move it. So now our origin's off again, but that's fine. We'll fix that again. Oh, and actually we want to move this down. And we're using this base. We're keeping the rough cutoff base here as a reference for us. So we can get the top of the base aligned to the top of the base that we have in Blender. This way we're getting the whole model scaled perfectly by using the base as reference. This is another one of the most important steps. So I like to make it kind of go in and out, cut in, like clipped partially. That means you have it pretty much even. So now once this is done, kind of hold middle mouse button to pan around, and that looks like it's lined up perfectly. So next, make sure we set origin to 3D cursor now that we've made those changes. And let's make sure our model's facing the same direct, like facing the camera here, which is Y. Right now we're in Z. Let's see here. Yeah. You'll see how in this icon here, the solid Y, that's basically where the camera would be by default. So you want to have it face you. That way, when you have it in game, it's kind of unified. All the models face the same direction that way. Oops. It's important. Okay. Let's switch back to move tool. Get this over. Okay. Now let's hide the base. Set the origin again because I just moved it. Now we're going to make sure the model's selected, go into edit mode, and we're going to cut off the rest of this that we're not using. There's a lot of ways of doing this. Ziggy Stardust, who's basically taught me a lot of this stuff, has his own way of doing it. I'm going to turn off these lines. They're annoying. There we go. Where he has like a big flat plane that he uses as a reference point instead of the base, and then he'll use the plane to cut. But there's a million ways of doing this in Blender. It's up to you. But what I do is click and hold the knife tool, switch to bisect. Tap A so you have all the polygons selected. And then you want to click and hold. And I use this red line as reference because that's where the top of the base was. I want to go just under it and drag across and keep using that red line as reference so we have a perfectly straight line. And now clear inner will cut out all the bottom part. So now we have a perfectly flat cut base. And that's what we want. So we can go just back up to object. We can even show our base to make sure we are still looking good. It looks good enough to me. And that's everything. So now, oh, actually, before we go, no, we want to make sure we're cleaning up a little bit of the texture. I'll show you how to do that. Underneath the armpit here, it was really white in the program, but through exporting and everything, it kind of turns more black, which is nice, actually. It's harder to see, but we can clean that up more. So let's go over here to texture painting, which kind of resets the camera. Let's get rid of this because we don't need that. Zoom back in. And now what I do, and you can use the clone tool. You hold control to set a point. If you know how to use clone tools in Photoshop or whatever, this works great. And honestly, you could just get away with only using this. But even faster is just use the smudge tool and just sort of do that. It makes it blurry, but again, this is stuff that people aren't seeing. It's just less noticeable than the black polygon marks that it has. And it's fast. And you can just sort of, once you like scrub back and forth a couple times, it disappears. Good enough. Let's get in there, get rid of that. Oh, there's a bunch in here. There we go. I think that's good enough. It's great, actually. So let's go back to layout. We're done there. Everything looks good. File, export, OBJ. We're going to want to find our same folder here. Where was the Khaaarl rip script? Horus Heresy, Infernus Abomination. I'm just going to overwrite the old one. It's probably best practice to make another version in case you mess up or something, but it's fine. Now you need to also export the image we edited. So go into Image Editor, open up your texture, and then hit Image, Save As, and it should remember the same folder as before. Again, I'm just going to overwrite this, and that's done. Next, we're going to take this into Photoshop. And you can use anything, GIMP, Affinity Photo. Do not pay for Photoshop. It's not really worth the money with the other options that are out there. So I've pirated it. You can get it however you want. Affinity Photo is pretty much just as good, and it's very cheap, and it's a great company. So just use that. So we're going to go ahead and import our texture. And you can just go in here to adjustments and add your edits we're going to do here to enhance this texture. But I'm just going to go ahead and actually load up my my save file here, which I think I can just open recent. Yeah, and I call it Null and Oil, coined by Seaborn, because you'll see it makes the model look pretty good, like Null and Oil does. So I open up my project file, and you'll see here I have vibrance, levels, and channel mixer. The vibrance is the main workhorse here. Well, actually, I guess it's 50-50 between that and levels. This increases the colors. Saturation is very powerful and exaggerated, so be very careful with that number. But vibrance is more subtle, and I like to use that more. And then levels will, well, you'll see here. Let's just add our picture into this project. You drag it into the area here. You tap enter. Let's bring this underneath all the layers. So you'll see with levels, it makes everything pop more. The textures typically come pretty washed out from photogrammetry programs. Kiri is another program out there. That's a web-based one. It actually autocorrects the colors for you. It's really nice. But here, we got to do it manually. So levels, what this is doing is here, it's increasing the shadows, which is very important. And then this is increasing the highlights. So we're going to go ahead and keep everything where I had it, hopefully. Yeah, good enough. Let's bring this up a little bit. I think it's right about there. And then channel mixer, what I'm doing is, by default, this is set to 100% for red. I like to turn it down a little bit, just a couple percent, because the reds, when you use vibrance, is a little bit exaggerated. But otherwise, you can use this to fine tune your colors. So once this is done, we're going to save it. Let's go ahead and name it, just so we can make sure it's separate. All right. Now let's bring that into Topaz. Another good one is Upscale, spelled with a SCAYL, spelled weird. It's free, and it also works pretty well. It's a little bit more stylized. It's heavier with its bold stylization, but this adds nice texture that Upscale does not do, as you can see in the before and after here. Play around with your different AI models that it's using. I like low resolution, but you can also use like high fidelity. It makes things smoother but more blurry, and you can control the amount of de-blur it has to varying degrees of success. I think a couple others like to use standard V1, which does look pretty good. So that's definitely an option. But sometimes it kind of gives it this weird, like, smoothed over look, whereas low resolution gives it these poppy textures, which may be exaggerated, but when it's on a mini, it actually looks pretty good in my opinion. So I'm going to pull up the deblur a little bit more. And I hit 2x, so it's 4096 4K. And that's it. I'm going to make sure we're going to pick our folder, which you can actually just say original folder. And this is going to save as JPEG as opposed to JPG, which is just the same thing, just different file extension name, which is nice because this means it won't overwrite the old one. You can also add a suffix or a prefix so that it won't overwrite even if they are the same. Okay, so now we have our model and our texture. Next, we need to use imagecompressor.com, which is a great open source website to compress the 4K image, because right now it's not too bad. Actually, no, here it is, yeah. 4.35 megabytes. It's pretty big for a texture, especially in TTS. We don't need it that big. So let's bring it into here. And now you can see it's reduced it by 77%. Now it's 1 megabyte. Yeah, so we'll just go with 77. Good enough. Let's go back to our Infernus Abomination. And this will add min as it's minimized, so lower file size. We'll just keep that. All right, I think we're just about done with everything. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my model collection mod. Now to get everything in here, you can go into Objects, Components, Custom, Model, and click, and it'll open up the custom model import screen. You want to make sure you go into Material and change this to Cardboard, because otherwise it'll come out shiny and weird looking. But what I do, this is again another tip from Ziggy Stardust, is we have a infinite bag here with these little bases. The bases are already set up to go. So you hit custom, it already has a collider of that tiny base size, which is fine. We want it to be smaller than our actual base. Set to figurine, it already set to cardboard, so most of the work's done for us. There's two ways of getting your stuff uploaded. You can either click the file here and browse and add it, or you can go into Modding Cloud Manager. This is where everything you've ever uploaded before is. And you can actually just upload local files through here and it set it up. So then when you click a texture, it automatically copies it to your clipboard. Then in here, you can just paste. That's great for if you're doing bulk, like a whole bunch of models from one unit that you just finished and you just do it all at once. But for this, it's just one model. So I'm just going to go ahead and go in here. And you want to upload to cloud so that other people can actually play with it. Now your image, let's find the one. This is the one with min. It is Nuln oiled and compressed. And import. And if it ever says this, you want to hit cancel. It's because it's detecting another model on the table that uses the same source, that little white base. We don't want to apply it to that as well. And there it is. It's looking great. So let's stick it on a base. That was 32. So there it is. And I have it set up so it snaps nicely to it. I'm just going to go ahead and copy these so I can keep that base there. Now you want to either hold Alt and select both of them and then click the base, and that will combine them. Or you can just click and drag from there to the base. Either way, you want to make sure the base is the thing that it's being attached to, because now you can go in here and change the base color. And that's important for unit, clarification. Like if you have different units of the same kind, but you want to make sure they're separated, you can do this. But we're just going to keep it to our default tan color that GW likes to use. And go ahead and name it. Make sure you put in the description who made it, and you're done. So if you have any questions, make sure you let us know in the Discord server. If you need any help or anything, we'll be there. And thanks for watching.